Hello everyone, and welcome to something slightly different. I normally post covers very irregularly on this channel, but today I'm here to teach people how to set up VTube models in VTube Studio. If you're using Pira Live or some other similar software, then some of the concepts may be similar, but I cannot show you around them because I do not know the software. Good luck with that one. So, first things, you are going to want to get files from your rigger. These should be a .moc3 file, which is the main file of your model and what will be used to load into VTube Studio. You'll have a .model3 file, a .cdi3 file, a .physics3 file, which you might not have, but you probably should. And then you'll also have a folder containing a bunch of image files that will make up your texture. In addition, you should have a .cmo3 file, but this isn't needed for using the model. This is just needed to edit the model rigging in the future, so make sure you store it somewhere safe, but you're not going to need to use it day to day. In addition, if you don't have any of the other files mentioned before, you can generate those files from the CMO3 file, but you're going to need rigging software for that, and I'm not going to cover that in this video. Once you've got all of your files, you're going to want to open VTube Studio and open the Model Load menu. This will show you any models you currently have set up, but will also have the Load Your Own Model button, which you can use to find the folder that VTube Studio reads the models from. And then you just gotta move all of your model files into a new folder in there. If you then go back into VTube Studio, it won't immediately see the new model, but once you restart the program, the new model should show up. Mine just popped right up here, but if yours doesn't, then go back to the Model Load menu and select your model. The first thing to do is going to be generating a .vtube file, which you can either do using the prompt you may have seen when I first loaded the model, or by clicking on this button in the second settings menu. If at any point you want to reset your settings and go back to the default, you can run this again and it will undo any changes you made. Use this at your own discretion, it will reset everything. This will automatically set up a lot of the parameters you need, and then it's time to start customizing your settings. Once you click into the model settings menu here, the first thing you've got at the top is the VTube Studio specific settings. The first box here is the movement config. Now, if the movement config is switched on, then it will move your model around the window and zoom in and out according to how your face position moves according to the camera. The X slider controls how much the model moves when you move from left to right. The further from the center the slider is, the more your model will move. However, if the number is positive, then when you move to your left, the model will move to the left of the screen. Whereas if the number is negative and you move left, it will move to the right of the screen. The same goes for the Y slider, except instead of left and right, it's up and down. And the Z slider is similar, but instead of controlling movement, it controls the zoom. If the number is positive and you move away from your camera, then the model will zoom out. Whereas if the number is negative and you move away from the camera, the model will zoom in. You can also just turn this off completely with the switch at the top if you don't want the model to move around. The next box is the physics slider. The slider controls what percentage of your body and face movements from the face tracking will be sent to the physics for your model. How exactly this affects your model will very much vary, so I'd advise just messing around with this until it looks good. The wind slider automatically sends an amount of X movement to the physics and simulates wind blowing. For some models, this will work really well and cause hair to just have a very nice slight movement. However, depending on how your rigging is done, this can instead cause some very weird, sometimes arm or body movements, so experiment with this one and your mileage may vary. In the main bulk of the parameter settings, you'll have a bunch of these boxes, and each one's going to be the same format. The first option on a parameter is the input, which means which set of information from the camera tracking will it use to control your model. If you click on the blue box, you'll get a list of all the options, and you can change them if you want to be a different one of the options. The second option is the output, which means which parameter on the model it will be controlling. These will have been set up and named by your rigger in a hopefully sensible manner, and once again you can click on the blue box to see all of the options. The options that are in red are the ones that have already been set up to be controlled by something else, so go look for the parameter controlling them if you want to change how those parameters work. The next thing in the box is this slider for smoothing. This controls how fast the parameter output can change on the model. You may want this fairly low on things like mouth movements that move fast to help your model be fairly expressive, but lower on things like body rotation, where fast changes are less likely to be intentional and more likely to be glitches in the face tracking. These two toggles here are auto blinking and auto breathing, and they're pretty self-explanatory. If you turn them on, so they're blue with the circle on the right, then VTube Studio will add automatic blinking or breathing to the output of this parameter. If you're turning on these toggles, you may want to remove any face tracking from the first input box, so these toggles are the only input that's put into them, but you could be doing something funky, go you, who knows. The last thing to control is unfortunately the most complicated, and these are the numbers for the input and output at the bottom of the box. This first section on the left is telling you what values it is reading from your input via this changing number and the little red dot going up and down. And this tells you the range of values you will use to control the model. When calibrating this, you'll want to look at the number displayed whilst you move around in front of your camera, and take note of what the extremes of the numbers are, though don't stretch into uncomfortable positions to do this because you want to be able to control your model without, hurting yourself. Once you've found what those extreme values are, you can put those numbers into the boxes at the input for the minimum and the maximum, and that should be your input setup. For the output, you'll want to think about how you want the model to move with your movements. So for many parameters, you'll just want to be controlling the full range of the parameter with your full range of motion. And so you can just leave the numbers at their maximum and minimum values. However, sometimes you'll only want part of your range of motion to control the parameter, for example, with a blush that turns on as you smile. If you want to do this via maths or a more technical approach, then you have to think about what proportion of the input range you want to use to control the model, and then set up the output numbers such that the maximum and minimum numbers of the parameter take up the same proportion of the output range. You can technically do this via adjusting the input numbers as well, but it's a lot easier to just keep these two concepts separate, and maths works fine either way. The less technical approach to this is that if you decrease the number at the bottom of the output below the minimum value displayed there, then the model will only change when you're in the upper section of the face tracking input. And if you make the number at the top of the output larger, then you will only move the model with the lower section of the input. And you can test out different values until it looks roughly how you want. Given that's a fairly confusing concept, we're going to run through an example. So this blush control has a lower value than 0 as the minimum. And so we'll have 0 blush when the face is sad or neutral, which is the bottom section of this face tracking, but will start fading in the blush as you smile more. You can also limit the amount of a parameter that is controlled by the face tracking by reducing the number at the top below the maximum or increasing the number at the bottom above the minimum, and then toggling the limit range toggle on your output parameter so it can never reach the full bounds of the parameter. So I'm starting this section with a disclaimer. If you want to add a full animation, then this will need to be created in the rigging software, and I am not covering how to do that here. However, if you have an animation file, which is a .motion3 file, then I'll be showing you how to set that up in VTube Studio. First things first though, we're going to look at creating expression files. So expressions are specific poses or options in your model that you want to be able to trigger in VTube Studio. And you can create these files on your own without having to go via a rigger. To do this, you need to go to the Cubism downloads page, and I should have put a link in the description below, and download the Cubism viewer. You don't need any of the other software on the page for this, so don't worry about the other download links. Once you've installed it, then you can open your model either via the File menu or by drag and dropping your .moc3 file onto the window, and it will display your model. If you then click onto the .moc3 file as displayed on the left here, then it will show you all of the parameters that your model has, and you can manually change these to take a look at the full range of motion your model has. To create an expression itself, you have to go to the File menu, then Add and Expression. This is where you enter the file name and the expression name. They can be different if you want to, but the expression name is what you will see in VTube Studio. Once you hit OK, click on the plus sign next to the expressions folder and click onto your new file. This will display all of the parameters in your model again, but this time with a tick box next to each one. These tick boxes indicate whether or not the parameter is controlled by the expression when it's activated. So if it's left unchecked, then the face tracking or other controls will be able to change this parameter as normal, but if checked, then the expression will override it. Go through the parameters and check all of the ones you want to control with your expression, and you will have sliders appear next to each one. This is used to select what value the parameter will be set to by the expression, and you can watch as the model displays your changes in the pose to help you decide what exact number or slider position you want for each parameter. Once you're happy with your expression, you can right-click on the file and save it. And congrats, you've made an expression file. To trigger either expressions or animations in VTube Studio, you want to first make sure that your files are all included in the model. Go back to the folder where you put your model, or go to the Load Model menu to really find the folder, and create a new folder within your model folder to store all of your animation and expression files in. You technically don't need to do this step, but believe me, you're gonna want to, otherwise your files will get completely out of hand. Head back to VTube Studio, and you don't need to restart it, and you want to go to the Final Settings menu over here and decide if you're using buttons on your keyboard or on-screen buttons to trigger all of your expressions and hotkeys. You can use both options if you want, you just need to turn the toggle on for any options you want to use. The last slider at the bottom here is an opacity slider for the on-screen buttons. You can ignore it if you're not using them, but it's used to just lower or raise the opacity of the buttons as seen in the VTube Studio window. To add a new hotkey, you're going to hit the plus button, and it'll appear a new set of hotkey controls. This group of hotkey actions is used to select the file you want to activate. So click on the blue hotkey action box and select Set Unset Expression or Play Animation for expression and animation files respectively. The second box will then change to say either animation or expression depending on which option you chose. And when you click on it, it will show all the valid files that you put into your model folder. Select the file that you want to trigger, and then you have to set up how you trigger this file. If you are using keyboard buttons, then you use the key combination options. You can either click on the blue box and manually select the keys you want from the list, or click on the record button and then press the key you want to use. If you set up one key binding, then it will trigger anytime you press that key. If you have two, then it will trigger only when both of the keys are pressed. If you want to remove one of your key bindings, then click on the box to get that list up and select the hyphen at the top and it will remove it. The next set of options is if you want to use hand gestures to trigger an expression. This is currently a beta feature and is liable to change, so I'm not going to explain that one right now. Have fun messing around with it if you want to use it. If you want to use on-screen buttons, then you use the screen button hotkey options. Each circle here is a button that can be shown on screen. If it's a faded blue color, then it's not currently in use and won't be displayed. If it is a saturated blue, then it is being used for this expression and is displayed on the side of your screen in VTube Studio. And if it's red, then it's a hotkey that is already in use for a different expression. When you've selected an on-screen button for an expression, you can use this slider at the bottom to select the color it will display. And this can be helpful for just reminding yourself which button triggers what. The last thing in this box is the hotkey settings, and they're fairly self-explanatory, but as a quick rundown, fade for sec controls how long it will take to go from your current position to the new position in the expression. If you turn the toggle on next to stop after sec, then it will automatically turn the expression off after a set period of time. Otherwise, you'd have to re-trigger the hotkey to turn it off again. If you're triggering an expression file, then you'll have the final option of stop when key is let go. And it's used to hold an expression file for as long as you are holding down a button and then turn it off when you release it. As a note, this does not work if you're using on-screen keys. I don't know if this is a bug or intended, but doesn't work. If you're triggering an animation instead of an expression, then the last option will be stop on last frame. And if you turn this on, it will mean that for all the parameters that the animation affects, it will hold that position until something else changes it. So it will be like you had an expression for the last frame of your animation. So, once you've got the hang of all of this, then you should be good to go. So, good luck out there, guys, and if you've got any further questions, then feel free to ask them in the comments below. I can't promise to have the answers, but I'll try my best.